First rule of leadership: everything is your fault.
If you are among the privileged few in this world that have reached the rank of CEO in your career, it goes without saying it has likely been very lucrative, but it's often a thankless job.
Hi, I'm Michael Moore.
As most everyone remembers what went wrong under your watch. And yes, everything is your fault.
This is a tire issue, and only a tire issue.
Here are my picks, and a few of your picks as well, for the worst automotive CEOs.
Can we talk about the box? Was
No,
there a box?
No, I'm not going to talk about it.
Everybody's talking about the box,
Well, good,
except you.
Good for them. Good for them.
Thanks to all of you that responded to my community page to offer your suggestions for this episode. I'm sure many will disagree with my choices, as some of these leaders made some great decisions as well, but those were overshadowed by some not so great decisions. Some current CEOs came up as suggestions, but since they are still on the job, and since this channel's name is My Old Car, I won't be including any of them in my main list, but stick around for the honorable mentions, as they might show up there. A quick shout out to Max Gorman, who reached out to me to share his new app that uses AI to identify cars just from a photo. Max is just 19 years old, and I think this is quite impressive for someone so young. Check out the links in the description below to download your free copy. Number 10, Malcolm Bricklin. Although Bricklin may be most famous for the short-lived sports car that bears his name, that was just one of several business ventures he attempted over his 60-plus year career. Born in 1939, he became a millionaire in his 20s after franchising his father's building supply store. Although he left before that chain went bankrupt, he found a new passion in cars and saw the potential of a little Japanese car that he thought he could sell well in the U.S.
Is the little Subaru really cheap and ugly?
This little car was a Subaru 360, and it was so little, and more importantly, so lightweight, it was exempt from typical U.S. regulations, meaning it could be imported here pretty much as is. But soon after its arrival in 1968, Consumer Reports gave it a scathing review, as it was effectively a death trap in a collision with any typical American car on the road at that time. When the 360 ended production in 1971, Bricklin moved on, but we have him to thank for Subaru of America still existing today. Bricklin's most well-known venture was starting his own car company that he called General Vehicles, and its one and only model, the SV1, in 1974. Thanks to the poor safety record of the Subaru 360, Bricklin was committed to making his new car the safest vehicle on the road, naming it the SV1, which meant Safety Vehicle 1.
And that's the Bricklin with safety as the most important design factor.
Built in New Brunswick, thanks to a deal made with the Canadian government to help curb unemployment there.
Bricklin has been and is an advertisement for New Brunswick.
The SV1 had a tubular steel frame and integrated roll bar, a 10-mile-an-hour front bumper when only 5-mile-an-hour bumpers were required, fiberglass panels with the paint integrated in, and of course, gull-wing doors. What safety advantage did these doors provide, you may ask? Well, none. They just look cool. But thanks to a low-skilled workforce, quality control became a huge concern, not to mention a sales price that neared $10,000, almost double the cost of a Corvette. Production ended after the New Brunswick government cut its losses and stopped its funding, after less than 3,000 SV1s were built. Not ready to give up, Bricklin would create International Automobile Imports, or IAI, in 1983, and imported Fiats under the Bertone and Pininfarina names, but the latter posed a conflict with the Cadillac Alante that also had a Pininfarina body, and Cadillac forced IAI to shut down. That was followed by his collaboration with Zastava Automobiles in Yugoslavia.
Made by Zastava or Zastafer or I don't know how you pronounce it.
Where he imported the Yugo to the U.S. beginning in 1986. Despite the laughable reputation the extremely cheap Yugo still has to this day, the Yugo would end up being Bricklin's most successful venture, as over 160,000 were sold in the U.S., up through 1992. And if it wasn't for the United Nations imposing sanctions on Yugoslavia and blocking all further trade with the U.S., I suspect they would have continued to be imported here for a few more years. His next venture was trying to import Chinese vehicles to the U.S. under the brand name Chery, which ultimately failed after several lawsuits. As of April 2024, Bricklin is 85 years old and trying to bring a new EV to market. This man just doesn't give up. Number 9, Bob Stempel. Stempel holds the unfortunate distinction of being the first General Motors CEO to be fired, since company founder Billy Durant was forced out in 1921. Stempel also had one of the shortest CEO tenures in GM history, at just over 2 years. But Stempel was an engineer, a true car guy, and rising star at GM long before he became CEO in 1990, making his quick downfall surprising, and some would say unfair, as there were other factors outside of his control that contributed to his firing. Stempel started with GM in 1958, working in the Oldsmobile design department, and would play a major role in the suspension and engine mounting systems of the 1966 Oldsmobile Toronado, the first GM car with front-wheel drive.
And the front wheels have the power.
In 1973, with emission controls becoming a high priority, Stempel led the development of the catalytic converter, which also led to him reaching the title of chief engineer at Chevrolet in 1974. He would later be promoted to general manager of Pontiac in 1978, the Opel division in Germany in 1980, Chevrolet in 1982, and the Buick Oldsmobile Cadillac Group in 1984. In 1987, he was promoted to president and chief operating officer, which further separated him from what he was really good at, being an engineer, which would soon prove to be a considerable liability. Despite that, Stempel managed to stay involved in GM's fledgling EV program that would later lead to the ill-fated GM EV1.
When I heard they were going to destroy them all, I hid it.
Following the retirement of CEO Roger Smith in 1990, Stempel was promoted to take his place, and as a result, he inherited plenty of issues that, not surprisingly, helped earn Smith a later spot on this list. But that was minor compared to what happened on Stempel's second day as CEO.
And an explosive development near the Persian Gulf. Word that Iraq has invaded neighboring state of Kuwait.
The U.S. economy, which heavily depended on oil, quickly went into recession, taking all the car companies with it. Stempel has been quoted as saying he had just one good day as CEO, his first day. Huge job cuts and plant closings were soon announced, but Stempel was slow to implement them, fearing the impact of the people and communities involved. He quickly learned that it's tough being a CEO when you truly care for the people who work for you. Stempel also negotiated a deal with the UAW that provided laid-off workers with 95% of their pay, which may have been the right thing to do from a moral standpoint, but it was a big hit to GM's bottom line. GM lost $4.45 billion in 1991, and by late 1992, the board effectively staged a coup, forcing Stempel out. He would later start a joint venture to make batteries for the EV1, which sadly was phased out by the year 2000 when the EV1 project was canceled. Although officially retired, Stempel continued to pursue renewable energy technology until he passed away on May 7, 2011, at the age of 77. Number 8. Jack Nasser.
I've said it before. If we had to do it all over again, we would act earlier.
Nasser has one of the shortest tenures of any Ford CEO, at less than 3 years. Yet he still managed to pack in more controversies in that time than most other CEOs ever do. So much so that a member of the Ford family had to step in to right the wrongs. Before he became CEO, Nasser's entire career had been at Ford, starting in 1968 at age 20 as a financial analyst at Ford of Australia. Over the following years, he would also work at Ford's truck division in the U.S., as well as Argentina, Mexico, and eventually making his way back to Australia in 1989, rising to president and CEO of Ford of Australia. It was here that Nasser earned the nickname Jack the Knife and Black Jack for his impressive cost-cutting talent. Nasser stayed at Ford of Australia until 1993, when he took on the role of chairman of Ford of Europe, as well as vice president of product development in 1994, and head of operations in 1996. Ford had become the world's most profitable automaker by the late 90s, and Nasser was often credited as a major contributor. When the current CEO, Alex Trotman, was planning his retirement, many of the industry suspected Nasser would be next in line for the job, and that happened on January 1, 1999. At the same time, William Clay Ford Jr., the great-grandson of Henry Ford, was appointed chairman. Thanks to the record profits, Bill Ford effectively gave Nasser free rein to try whatever he wanted. Nasser took that advice to heart and worked towards his goal of transforming Ford into what he called a consumer products and service company. He felt that Ford depended too much on truck sales and wanted to diversify the company portfolio. Despite the record profits, Nasser quickly worked to close underperforming plants and diversified Ford's business to include junkyards, auto repair shops, and e-commerce. The latter was in its infancy in 1999, and he quickly drew the wrath of Ford dealers, who saw e-commerce as an unjustified attack against them. Nasser also implemented a controversial program which allowed 10% of low-performing managers to be subject to termination, as he believed the turnover would be good for the company, and it became so disliked that he was forced to phase it out by mid-2001.
Miss, are you okay?
I'm sorry. I'm not really used to bosses using trigger words like demanding and inspect and work.
Nasser would also oversee Ford's acquisition of Volvo and Land Rover, which would join existing Ford subsidiaries Jaguar and Aston Martin under Ford ownership. Nasser would put all these brands, along with Lincoln and Mercury, under a new organization called the Premier Automotive Group, which didn't last much longer beyond his tenure as CEO. But the biggest stain to his legacy was the Firestone tire scandal. In early 2000, an investigation uncovered the possibility that the Firestone tires on Ford's extremely popular Explorer SUV could be the root cause for some fatal rollover accidents. Nasser fought hard for Ford and blamed Firestone, who in turn blamed Ford.
Got another rejection letter from Firestone saying that I'm sorry, it's not part of the recall. That
the dispute was flashed all over the media, damaging the reputation of both companies. It didn't help that Ford and Firestone had been partners since nearly the start of the Ford Motor Company, and Bill Ford is not only Henry Ford's great-grandson, but is also Harvey Firestone's great-grandson, making this uniquely personal for him.
A lot of days where I wish I weren't here.
Bill Ford's relationship with Nasser had been souring over his time as CEO, so much so that Bill Ford eventually started taking on more day-to-day responsibilities of running the company.
I wanted you to hear directly from me.
Although Nasser wasn't officially fired, his resignation in October 2001 was not unexpected, nor was his replacement all that unexpected, Bill Ford himself. It would be the first time a member of the Ford family would take back control of the family business, since Henry Ford II left in 1980. Number 7. Carlos Ghosn. This is an example of a CEO who, if you only know his history up through the mid-2010s, you may think he belongs on a list of the best CEOs, considering what he did to help return both Renault and Nissan to profitability. But considering that as I write this in April 2024, he is a fugitive hiding out in Lebanon, after being literally smuggled out of Japan in 2019, so his legacy now is a bit more complicated. Carlos Ghosn started his career at tire maker Michelin in 1978, working in France, Germany, and eventually his home country of Brazil, where he helped their South American operations return to profitability. In 1990, he was promoted to CEO of Michelin's North American operations, and would remain CEO until taking an executive vice president position at Renault in 1996, and significantly contributing to Renault's return to profitability by the following year. In 1999, Renault purchased a 36.8% stake in Nissan to form the Renault-Nissan Alliance, and Ghosn would work his way up to CEO of Nissan by 2001. He would be Nissan's first non-Japanese CEO, and his restructuring plans and ways of doing business were often at odds with Japanese culture. He slashed thousands of jobs and closed 5 assembly plants in Japan, eliminated the standard Japanese process of promotions based on age and seniority, and made radical changes to longtime suppliers. Ghosn even changed the company's official language from Japanese to English, which allowed North American and European execs more inclusion in global strategy. By 2003, Ghosn had eliminated Nissan's debt, which led him to becoming CEO of Renault, thereby leading both companies at the same time. In 2016, Ghosn took on the role of chairman of Mitsubishi, following its acquisition by the Renault-Nissan Alliance. However, behind the scenes, Ghosn had allegedly been taking advantage of his role in the company by underreporting his compensation, and used company assets for personal use, in particular, paying for several residences around the world. An internal investigation at Nissan led to Ghosn being arrested on November 19, 2018.
These allegations are untrue, and I should have never been arrested in the first place.
His incarceration kept being extended as more and more charges kept being added. He'd already lost his CEO and chairman titles at Nissan and Mitsubishi, but it took until January 2019 for Ghosn to resign from Renault. He was finally released from prison and put under house arrest in April 2019 in Japan, and over the subsequent months, and with some outside help, he concocted a daring plan to leave the country, as he firmly believed he would never be exonerated if he remained in Japan.
My only hope of being able to defend myself, get out of the country.
On December 30, 2019, he left his apartment, and his security detail didn't follow him into a hotel.
I'm shocked and confused.
Where his accomplices stuffed Ghosn into an audio equipment box.
He reportedly got there in a musical instrument case.
Got him out of the hotel and driven to a private jet, which flew him to Lebanon, where Ghosn originally grew up as a child and still owned a residence there. Thanks to Lebanon having no extradition treaty with Japan, Ghosn has remained a fugitive to this day and can't leave the country. Several of his accomplices in the escape would later be charged and sent to prison for their role. Ghosn has earned many accolades and awards during his career, including an honorary British knighthood. I wouldn't be surprised if they have since asked for that back.
Has Hollywood approached you about your story?
Yes.
Number 6. Martin Winterkorn. Here's another name that unless you're a car guy, you may not recognize it.
German prosecutors have charged Volkswagen's former CEO, Martin Winterkorn, with serious fraud.
But chances are, even if you're not a car guy, you've heard of the Volkswagen diesel cheating scandal. Winterkorn was the man at the top when the scandal broke, making him ultimately responsible, despite his insistence that he wasn't directly responsible. If there's anyone on this list that is a perfect example of
first rule of leadership, everything is your fault,
this would be it. Winterkorn started his career at Bosch in 1977, and in 1983 he joined Volkswagen with the title of, ironically, Group Quality Assurance. By the year 2000, he had worked his way up to the VW Group Board of Management for Technical Development, and helped convince then VW CEO Ferdinand Piëch to approve the production of the new Beetle. Before becoming CEO of the entire Volkswagen Group, Winterkorn was first the head of the Audi brand group, which included Seat and Lamborghini, in 2002. When he reached CEO in 2007, Winterkorn immediately began working on his goal for VW to surpass General Motors and Toyota by the year 2018. Winterkorn was well known for his strong attention to detail and intense work ethic, which as CEO he tried to pass on to his subordinates, who often viewed him as being very demanding and in turn, intimidating. It was this personality trait that may have been a liability when Volkswagen faced what could arguably be its biggest challenge ever as an automaker. By the mid-2010s, VW had become well known across the auto industry for the fuel efficiency of their diesel engines.
The Jetta TDI Clean Diesel.
I got a hybrid, so,
A TDI set a Guinness World Record 58 miles per gallon.
Which helped win over many U.S. buyers, a market which in the past had not favored diesel, thanks to its reputation as being more dirty, loud, and not known for high performance as compared to gasoline engines. But during the 2000s, VW convinced more and more U.S. buyers to consider them, since somehow VW managed to make their diesels not only fast, but also fuel efficient.
You know what's really great about the all-new 2012 Volkswagen Passat TDI Clean Diesel? Not only does it provide excellent fuel economy, but you'll love the performance too.
However, to reach these goals, Winterkorn insisted on efficiency and performance levels that VW engineers simply couldn't obtain, and few, if anyone, had the courage to question him. So to get around this, VW engineers developed software that could detect when their cars were attached to emission testing devices, and in turn provide cleaner readings. By 2015, the US EPA conducted their own testing and believed they had proof of the existence of this defeat device. Initially, the official response from VW was that the discrepancies were technical glitches, but in August of 2015, one of VW's reps admitted to the EPA that they had indeed been cheating. In an official statement, Winterkorn provided an apology.
I would like to make a formal apology to our customers, to the authorities, and to the general public for this misconduct.
But didn't take responsibility himself. Instead said the deception was due to terrible mistakes made by a few select individuals. With pressure mounting for his resignation, Winterkorn officially resigned on September 23, 2015. And although in his statement he accepted responsibility for the deception, as he rightly should have as CEO, he also stated that he was unaware of the deception and did not believe he did anything wrong. Volkswagen ultimately had to recall over 11 million cars, both in the US and around the world. In addition, VW could not sell thousands of 2016 diesel models that were stranded at US ports until the cheat software was removed. The cost of VW in vehicle buybacks and ongoing litigation by countries around the world, not to mention their loss in reputation, has cost VW billions, which is why it's no surprise they are now putting much of their time and money towards the development and marketing of EVs.
They should put in an external investigator to check it, and Mr. Winterkorn should resign.
Number 5. Henry Ford. This is probably the only person on this list who could also be in a top 10 list of best CEOs, as one of my viewers pointed out, and I totally agree. There is no denying that we have Henry Ford to thank for many aspects of the auto industry that we take for granted today, such as the moving assembly line, mass production assembly methods, and offering a living wage for his workers. But his stubbornness and inability to relinquish his grip on the company earned him a spot on this list. Unlike some of the other CEOs in this list, Henry Ford was an engineer at heart. He built his first car, the quadricycle, in 1896, while working for Thomas Edison.
It uses a total loss oil system, which means it just throws oil up your back as you drive. It's sort of like a spa treatment kind of thing.
Although his first two companies failed, one of which ironically would later reorganize to become the Cadillac Motor Company, the creation of the Ford Motor Company in 1903 would be a success, starting with the Model A in 1903. Several additional models followed, one for each letter of the alphabet, but it wasn't until the Model T debuted in 1908 that Henry Ford finally achieved success.
The Model T. Strong, sturdy, with a will of its own.
The Model T would soon become the best-selling car in the U.S., and Henry Ford would refine and improve his manufacturing processes to allow the price of the car to drop from its original $850 price to as low as $240 by 1924.
It breaks down a lot. Like a lot.
The success of the Model T was so great that by 1918, this single model held a 50% market share in the U.S. Henry allowed his son Edsel to become president in 1919, but it meant little, as Henry still ran the show. By 1920, Henry bought out all minority shares of the company, including his former partners, the Dodge brothers. He showed no interest in developing a new model, despite competition cutting into sales of the Model T, not to mention son Edsel working behind the scenes, without his dad's approval, to develop a replacement. The replacement was a second car to be given the name Model A, launched in 1927.
So these floorboards were originally meant to be a crate for parts, and they were reused.
Henry would become well known beyond the auto industry, speaking his mind about his disdain for the U.S. involvement in the First World War, and, far worse, his disdain for Jews, which he could freely publish about in the Dearborn, Michigan newspaper, since he owned it. Henry was also very anti-union, and hired loyalists like Harry Bennett that controlled his workers almost like a mob boss. This led to a walkout, which in turn led to a brawl, many injuries, and deaths. Ford Motor would be the last major automaker to recognize the UAW in 1941, but only after a strike at the River Rouge plant. Henry threatened to break up the company before cooperating with the UAW, and it took his wife Clara threatening to leave him to force Henry to comply. Henry's anti-Semitic beliefs initially prevented him from helping with the U.S. war effort in 1939, and instead he helped produce military equipment for Nazi Germany, thanks to his clear preference for Adolf Hitler. Henry finally capitulated in 1940, boasting that he could build 1,000 warplanes a day, which led to the creation of the Willow Run facility in 1941. Following son Edsel's unexpected death from cancer in 1943, Henry officially took back full control of the company, despite having suffered multiple strokes in the late 1930s, and becoming increasingly neurotic and resentful, even coming close to having the U.S. government intervening to restore the company. Henry only finally gave up when the company was close to bankruptcy, and both his wife and Edsel's widow threatened to sell off their 3/4 share of the company. Edsel's son Henry II took over, and Henry Ford died less than 2 years later. Number 4. Jürgen Schrempp. Anyone who lived through the debacle that was Daimler Chrysler knows this name all too well. Schrempp, born in 1944, began his career at Daimler-Benz as an apprentice mechanic before officially joining the company in 1967. He quickly rose through the management ranks in the commercial vehicle division, Mercedes-Benz South Africa, had a short stint working in the U.S. with the acquisition of the Freightliner Trucking Company, and became CEO of Daimler subsidiary Deutsche Aerospace in 1989. All this led to his eventual promotion to CEO of Daimler-Benz in 1995, replacing Edzard Reuter, who had managed to rid the company of 5.7 billion Deutschmarks that year. As a new CEO, Schrempp quickly set out to right the wrongs of his predecessor.
My main challenge is to continue the work of Edzard Reuter and bring the company into a more international perspective.
He quickly made the company profitable again, and the Daimler-Benz stock doubled in value by 1997. All that success apparently went to his head, as Schrempp was determined to make Daimler-Benz a global empire that would span Europe, North America, and Asia. The first step in that plan was the purchase of Chrysler for $36 billion. With the cooperation of then Chrysler CEO Bob Eaton, the new company would become Daimler Chrysler, and was initially referred to, at least publicly, as a merger of equals.
But this is much more than a merger. Today we are creating the world's leading automotive company for the 21st century, Daimler Chrysler.
And at first, from a financial standpoint, it was predicted to be a success, as the value of the combined company reached $84 billion just after the merger. Things quickly turned sour, however, as many execs from the newly minted Chrysler Group simply could not adapt to the new company culture and resigned. Chrysler had been making a profit prior to the merger, one of the reasons it was an attractive proposition for Schrempp, but that profit would soon stumble into the red. Although Chrysler benefited from gaining access to Daimler engineering for upcoming models.
What have been the benefits of the merger between Daimler-Benz and Chrysler? Okay, get in.
Schrempp would later admit publicly that he had only called it a merger of equals, just to get Chrysler to agree to the purchase. He had always intended it to be an acquisition, and this deception would later lead to billionaire investor Kurt Kerkorian's unsuccessful lawsuit, alleging fraud.
I want to go on record right now. I will never entertain settlement talks with Daimler.
Schrempp would also sink $3 billion into acquiring Mitsubishi to complete the Asian portion of his global plan, but that deal would soon go bust as well. Back home in Germany, Mercedes-Benz was suffering from alarming lapses in quality, and their smart sub-brand of tiny city cars would take years to ever show a profit.
I do not like small cars. I can't stand them. So this thing must bear the full brunt of my hatred. You get that? I hate you.
Bob Eaton would resign on March 31, 2000, and Schrempp put his second in command, Dieter Zetsche, in charge of Chrysler, so the Germans were now running both divisions. Zetsche himself would become an advertising slogan to try and promote German engineering in Chrysler cars, with limited success.
Cool. What would you expect? We invented the automobile.
Behind the scenes, Zetsche implemented a restructuring plan that would cost Chrysler 26,000 jobs. But eventually he did manage to make Chrysler profitable again. Despite that, the company value had sunk by $50 billion by 2004. Schrempp became so toxic back in Germany that his resignation was announced in 2005. The announcement simply stated that he was leaving the company, with none of the traditional thanks for his service that you would expect. Yes, they were that happy to see him go. Number 3. Rick Wagoner. When Wagoner was promoted to CEO of General Motors in June of 2000, he was only 47 years old, the youngest CEO in GM's history. But little did he know that before his CEO tenure would end 9 years later, 5 of GM's car divisions would be eliminated, 2 of which had existed long before he was born, all just to keep the company afloat.
New Oldsmobiles are in early this year.
And despite that, GM would still have to accept a government bailout. That last one ultimately cost Wagoner his job. Wagoner started with GM just after getting his Harvard MBA in 1977 as a financial analyst in GM's New York office. Wagoner quickly earned a reputation at being great with numbers and quickly worked his way through several management jobs, including at General Motors of Brazil, Canada, and Switzerland. In 1992, he finally reached GM's Detroit headquarters with a promotion to Chief Financial Officer. His goal was working with then CEO Jack Smith to bring GM back to profitability following the huge losses during Bob Stempel's short stint as CEO. In 1994, Wagoner was promoted to president of GM's North American operations, his first time in a role where he was expected to manage more than just finances. He often felt like an outsider, and he wasn't a car guy and didn't have any engineering or design background, a definite disadvantage in the car industry. Wagoner also had to take on serious personnel issues in this new role and gain the reputation of a hardliner. This was especially true with GM's tumultuous relationship with the UAW, as Wagoner caused 13 work stoppages between 1996 and 98, costing GM a whopping $4 billion. Despite this, he still managed to be promoted to Chief Operating Officer in 1998, and the CEO position 2 years later, succeeding Jack Smith.
You have to pinch yourself sometimes. I'm 45, I'm president of General Motors.
Despite GM's history of typically promoting from within, Wagoner would do several hires from the outside, the most daring being Bob Lutz, former Chrysler exec, to lead new product development in 2001. Despite Lutz's hiring, under Wagoner's direction, GM was slow to respond to the most popular trend of the decade, the crossover, although that may be because they had to dig out of a hole that was the Pontiac Aztek. They were also slow to developing gas-electric hybrids, and they killed the GM EV1, not to mention announced the phase-out of Oldsmobile, just as Wagoner started in 2000.
CEO Rick Wagoner announced today that General Motors has decided
to not develop future products for Oldsmobile.
Although profits improved in Wagoner's early years, quality and innovation was slipping. High gas prices helped feed a recession that became a near depression by 2008. Wagoner only really knew how to manage the finances, which led him to kill off Saturn, Hummer, Pontiac, and Saab, giving GM the sad nickname of the vanishing auto company.
The 2004 Grand Prix with Comp G, the baddest motherfucking Pontiac made!
In the second quarter of 2008 alone, GM lost over $15 billion. Wagoner joined the CEOs from Ford and Chrysler to ask for government assistance, which GM eventually got, but at a price, as President Obama forced Wagoner out of his job. No bailout without a change in leadership. Number 2, Roger Smith. If you saw the movie Roger and Me, the 1989 Michael Moore documentary about the impact of the GM plant closures in Flint, Michigan in 1986, you know at least part of this CEO story.
The effect on Flint is absolutely devastating.
And if you live not too far from Flint, like I do, it hits close to home. Some allege the film may be more propaganda than documentary, but either way, it is a sad commentary on what a thankless job being a CEO can be. Roger Smith's entire career was at General Motors, starting in 1949 as an accounting clerk, the company treasurer by 1970, a VP in 1974, and CEO in 1981. Smith started his tenure at a turbulent time in GM's history, suffering its first annual loss since the 1920s, losing market share to the Japanese, and battling lawsuits and quality failings. Smith became CEO just after GM secured a large tract of land in the city of Hamtramck that displaced thousands of residents and decimated entire neighborhoods. But Smith had promised this new plant, along with 2 others, would showcase amazing new technology, most notably robots, which he claimed could almost run the factories by themselves. During the 1980s, Smith spent nearly $90 billion on a joint venture with a Japanese robotics company, which ultimately proved to be a failure and a PR nightmare. In the end, the robots needed more human assistance, not less, making GM the highest cost auto producer in the nation, when they were once the lowest cost. Smith also undertook a massive reorganization in 1984 that was intended to streamline processes by combining the brands into small car and large car groupings. The reorg instead was a bottleneck that crippled the company, leading to duplicate processes and staff, exactly what it was supposed to prevent, and would take long after Smith's tenure to get back to normal. Smith was also behind the creation of the W-body, also known as GM10, which was a redesign of several mid-size models and switching to front-wheel drive. It cost over $7 billion, and the company reorg added complexity that meant GM was losing money on every car.
Ready, Dad? I'm ready. You ready? I'm ready.
steady as she goes.
Smith's consolidation efforts would also make the 80s the decade of blatant rebadging, such as the entire J-Car line that included the infamous Cadillac Cimarron. Despite all looking nearly identical, many of the parts inside were still unique to each model, so the cost savings wasn't achieved, and the result was a cookie-cutter image that would take years to overcome. Smith was also behind a failed joint venture with Toyota to build the Corolla-based Chevy Nova, and also the creation of the Saturn brand, which ultimately created competition within GM's own models.
That's a fucking Saturn?
In 1984, Smith coordinated the acquisition of Electronic Data Systems, or EDS, for over $2.5 billion to achieve his grand modernization plan. But EDS founder Ross Perot, yes, the same Ross Perot that would try running for president twice in the 1990s,
I got funny ears, fine, okay? So let's have a debate on my ears, okay? Is that what you want?
was very vocal about Smith's mismanagement of GM. In 1986, Smith convinced Perot to accept a buyout of his shares, which cost GM another $700+ million, but not before the strained relationship between Smith and Perot was often played out for all the public to see. But it was the 1989 movie Roger and Me, which was Michael Moore's first film, that Roger Smith's legacy is permanently attached to. A common theme throughout the movie is Moore's repeated attempts to interview Smith, and implies that he was repeatedly denied the opportunity.
Anything above the first level here is private property. That's off limits.
However, in 2007, footage surfaced of a 1987 interview, so there has been some accusations of deception. Many critics said the movie has several factual inaccuracies.
He's been found to have fabricated or invented or carpentered a number of distortions and outright lies into his narrative.
And at the time of the film's release, Flint's economic conditions were technically on the upswing, making some criticize the film as just propaganda. But it became very popular with GM employees of the time, who were ready to see a change in leadership.
Best thing Miss can do and General Motors can do is get rid of Roger Smith and them other son of a bitches.
And Siskel and Ebert put it on their top 10 list of films for 1989.
Roger and Me is the right movie in the right place and the right time and with the right sense of humor.
Roger Smith passed away in 2007 at the age of 82, and was likely bitter about how the film hurt his legacy, right up until the end.
Well, I'm sorry about that.
Could you come up to Flint with us?
I cannot come to Flint, I'm sorry.
Here are a few honorable mentions, based on your feedback. John Z. DeLorean. This one originally made it on my list, but as I was writing the script and figuring out the rankings, too many others that I thought were more deserving pushed this one off. So I guess you can consider this one my number 11.
Holy shit, you're John DeLorean, aren't you?
DeLorean was a brilliant designer in his early days at GM, and we have him to thank for the first-gen Firebird and GTO. And I give him considerable credit for taking the chance to lead GM to fulfill his dream of creating his own sports car, something that any true car guy would dream of. Unfortunately, he had to make a lot of conciliations to make it happen, such as building the plant in Northern Ireland during the heart of the IRA uprisings, hiring a low-skilled workforce.
This is an area of extremely high unemployment. 1 man in 3 is without work.
And a shady drug deal to secure enough funds to avoid bankruptcy. That last one almost landed him years in prison, but despite ultimately being acquitted, that became his legacy. Well, that, and the car later becoming one of the most famous in movie history.
You gotta be kidding me.
Elon Musk.
Sorry? You're Elon Musk. I am? What an honor to meet you. I'm such a fan.
Okay, maybe that clip hasn't aged all that well. Considering my channel is called My Old Car, it wouldn't make sense to include a current CEO on this list, and also because his legacy isn't completely set yet. But there is no denying that Musk could be one of the most polarizing CEOs of any company today. Unlike most every other CEO on this list, who are only really known by fellow car people, Musk's ventures outside of Tesla, for better or worse, have made him a household name. His personal and political views are often at odds with running a company that produces product as progressive as EVs. And except for his loyal fan base, his outspoken opinions could be contributing to a recent decrease in sales and a price drop on some Tesla models.
If somebody's going to try to blackmail me with advertising, blackmail me with money, go f*** yourself.
Yes, overall EV sales have leveled off recently, but I think it would be naive to say that no one has ever changed their mind on buying a Tesla simply because of the man in charge. Mary Barra. As the current CEO of General Motors, this is another CEO that doesn't make sense to include on this list for my channel, but several of you suggested her, as some of her recent decisions, primarily with EVs and automated vehicle technology, haven't been as well received or as successful as she hoped. But considering she recently reached her 10-year anniversary as CEO, second only at GM to Alfred P. Sloan, she must have done something right. Number 1. Bob Eaton. I don't think there should be much argument that Bob Eaton, who became CEO of Chrysler in 1993, belongs on this list. The only debate, I suppose, is where he belongs on this list. For me, and I suspect for any serious Mopar fan, Eaton's decision to accept an offer to merge with Daimler-Benz in 1998 makes him an easy pick for number one. His decision ultimately ended the Chrysler Corporation. Not just then, but still to this day, as Chrysler has never been a standalone company since. Eaton is the only CEO on this list who spent most of his career at a different automaker before becoming CEO at a competitor. He was hired as an engineer at GM soon after he graduated in 1963, and was involved in much of the controversy that was the Chevy Corvair, often being responsible for testing the car's maneuvers for accident investigations. Eaton would eventually reach the title of President of GM of Europe in 1988, and his performance there led to his offer of Chrysler Vice Chairman in 1992, followed by CEO in 1993, taking over for Lee Iacocca following his retirement. This promotion to CEO came as a surprise to many within Chrysler, as well as the automotive business as a whole, as most expected that VP Bob Lutz would get the job.
I'm sure that you're asking yourself the question, am I disappointed? And of course I am. I mean, who wouldn't be under the circumstances?
Lutz had only been with Chrysler since 1986, but during that time, he played a significant role in revamping Chrysler's lineup, such as the Dodge Viper, the '94 Dodge Ram, the Chrysler LH cars, and especially the Plymouth Prowler, which for those of you who watch my channel, you know that I have a very big soft spot for that last one. Yeah. Yet Lutz has been quoted as saying he remained good friends with Eaton despite being passed over for the top job. This influx of new product led to over $3 billion in earnings for 1994, and in 95, Chrysler was breaking all-time sales records and earned the Company of the Year award from Forbes in 1996. All this success caught the attention of Jürgen Schrempp, CEO of Daimler-Benz, an earlier entry on this list, who saw an opportunity to expand in North America. In 1998, Schrempp offered $36 billion to acquire Chrysler, but the agreement was worded to treat it as a merger, and that Eaton would become co-CEO with Schrempp. Now, admittedly, I have never held an executive role in any company, but even I know that trying to split the top job across two people is a bad idea. Inevitably, one of the two will be more assertive and become the dominant decision maker, and that was clearly Schrempp. It didn't help Eaton that everyone back in Germany treated Chrysler as a subsidiary, as Schrempp had always planned, and was making all the major decisions. Several Chrysler execs left on their own, or were forced out within the first year.
At corporate headquarters in Auburn Hills, all of Chrysler's dream team, a dozen executives, are now gone.
By the time VP Thomas Stallkamp was let go in the fall of 1999, Eaton was the last original Chrysler executive left.
And we prided ourselves on being a little bit off the wall in our designs and our organization.
Schrempp publicly admitted the merger was really a takeover less than 2 years in, which led to a major lawsuit from former Chrysler shareholders.
We were deceived, totally deceived. He misled us and everyone else.
Early on, Eaton would be one of the biggest cheerleaders of the deal, and dismissed anyone who continued to see the deal for what it really was. Despite this, it was later revealed that after signing the deal, Eaton had agreed to retire within 3 years, despite early interviews where he was committed to his new role and had no plan to retire. When he announced his retirement in 2000 after only 2 years, it left Schrempp as the sole CEO, and he put his second-in-command, Dieter Zitsche, in charge of Chrysler headquarters in Auburn Hills, Michigan. Although the German influence did produce some very successful cars, such as the rear-drive LX platform, which underpinned the Dodge Charger and Challenger, among others, and some not-so-successful.
It's the all-American roadster.
Like the Chrysler Crossfire, shared with the Mercedes-Benz SLK.
Apart from the bits that are German.
The integration of cultures that Eaton thought would be such an advantage turned out to be exactly the opposite.
Daimler Chrysler, not just a company, but the continuation of a journey that began with the invention of the automobile.
The German execs treated their so-called partners so poorly that by the mid-2000s, what little Chrysler leadership remained wanted out. They got their wish in May of 2007, when Daimler paid $650 million for Cerberus Capital Management to take Chrysler. A few years later, Chrysler would be acquired by Fiat, and later joined PSA to become Stellantis. Eaton would never return to the car business, and has kept a low profile ever since. And like most other Mopar loyalists, despite all his great intentions, Eaton's legacy will always be the one who turned the Big Three into the Big Two. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, click the like button and subscribe to my channel. If you once owned a car from the 80s to mid-2000s that you rarely see today and would like it featured in a future episode, leave a reply in the comments or contact me at the email shown here. See you next time.
Someone hardly touched their pumpkin pie. Want to share it with me? a partially eaten piece of pumpkin pie from a homeless shelter with Elon Musk? You bet I do!